The option to name your ships is being added to Star Citizen, starting in patch 3.13. But it's no easy thing to come up with a name that doesn't kinda sound like your very first email address. In this episode of Starships and Warships, we'll look at how modern warships get their names. I have 12 years of experience as a warfare officer in the Royal Navy, on warships from minesweepers to aircraft carriers. I've taken part in maritime security and counter-piracy operations as part of the command team on the bridge, and operated with multinational task groups. Starships and Warships is where I take something Star Citizen and look at it from a naval officer's perspective. As long as it would be fun and enhance the game, we'll talk about it. At the end of this video, I put together a few examples of possible names for some of the ships in Star Citizen. They're only on screen for a few seconds, so you'll need to use pause, but feel free to use them as they are or as some inspiration to kickstart the process. Warships of the same design are called a class, and just like each ship has a name, each class has a name as well. Sometimes the first ship in that class will carry the same name. For example, the current US aircraft carriers are called the Nimitz class, and there is actually a USS Nimitz. But the British Type 23 frigates are the Duke class, but there isn't just a HMS Duke. And this carries over really easy into Star Citizen. In fact, it's already been done. If you watch the Hammerhead commercial, the ship that features in that is called the UEES Thresher. All CIG have done is continued the themes of sharks, used another name. And the shark theme was obvious. You've only got to look at the Hammerhead and the outline of it to realise that actually they had very little choice in what they were going to call it. But how are ship names chosen in real-world navies? In the US Navy, that's determined by the role the ship is intended to fulfill. US carriers are mostly named after presidents like USS Abraham Lincoln or the Gerald R. Ford. Cruisers are named after battles like Ticonderoga and Gettysburg. There are ships named after states, cities, and even different weather types like USS Tempest and Monsoon. And then there's things like the Avenger-class mine countermeasure ships that have some really interesting names. USS Sentry, Devastator, and Warrior, etc. For British warships, it's slightly different. The type of ship doesn't tie it to particular names. The upcoming Type 26 frigates will be the Sheffield class, which was a name last borne by destroyers that saw action in the Falklands and Gulf War. What the Royal Navy does have is a particular fondness for historic ship names being reused. We had 3 old carriers that have not long been scrapped: the Ark Royal, Illustrious and Invincible. Ark Royal was actually going to be called the Indomitable, until public demand had the name changed. It also leads to some very unique traditions. For example, the Monmouth is the only ship in the Royal Navy allowed to fly the back flag, in memory of the fact that the Duke of Monmouth led a failed rebellion against the King. I'm not aware of any similar traditions in the US Navy, but that's not to say they don't exist. So if you've served or if you know of any, let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. It doesn't look like CIG have kind of stuck with this with their own ships. Yes, the Hammerhead has the Hammerhead and the Thresher, but it also has things like the Cayenne Mountain. But that's not necessarily a problem. Actually, it can be a bit of an advantage. You just apply the same principle. Think of various mountain or hill ranges in the US, and any of those could be your potential name. It's just a way of applying a theme to a ship. There are also some names that navies will just stay away from, like Hood or Bismarck, and some names that are only used for specific purposes. Take the Dreadnought, for example. When it launched in 1906, it changed the face of warfare so much that ships became known as pre- or post-Dreadnought. And since then, the Royal Navy has only used the name one more time, for its very first nuclear-powered submarine. For civilian ships, there aren't anywhere near as many restrictions. I mean, you don't get to call them the USS or HMS, that's reserved for ships of war. And that's kind of why I expect ships that have been named UEES by players to kind of lose that tag at some point in the future. But places, people, sweethearts, moods, plays on words, all of that stuff is fair game. And that's very much how I see things like the Prospector and the Reclaimer and all the civilian ships to be named. In comparison to the real world, the smallest ships like fighters would be more like the aircraft flown from aircraft carriers, so they'll have tail numbers and call signs more like aviation than navy. And some of the names of these are problematic. If you take the Cutlass, the Gladius and the Sabre for example, they're all types of swords. Now, you could have called those squadrons things like Scimitar Squadron, Dagger, Falchion, Rapier, if only one of those was named after swords and you'd instantly know what you're talking about. But which one of those was the Cutlass Squadron? Which one of those was the Sabre and which one of those was the Gladius? It gets a little bit confusing. But that doesn't mean that the aviation theme isn't useful. What I'd love to see is Retaliators and the like name like World War II bombers with great names and awesome nose art, and maybe we can even convince CIG to allow us to add custom nose art to our ships. So how does any of this work in the game? Well, it's going to be great to name some of the military ships. Like the Starfarer Gemini, I like the idea of the Starfarer naming the ships after famous people from the lore in space travel. So maybe the first person to do a quantum jump, or the first person to go from a jump point. The Idris might need to be a little bit careful with that. Idris was a prophet from the Quran, but Idris is also a character from Welsh mythology. So maybe some mythological or religious names would fit really well there. The Javelin, apart from Javelin, I can't think of many sporting goods that you would probably want to name that ship. The Shot Put just doesn't have the same ring to it, so that would be an ideal candidate for some of the more out there names. Warspite, Indefatigable, Ajax, Typhoon, Squall, whatever you want to go for, I think that would be better than, the UES Hurdle. And Polaris is really easy. You're looking at basically star names, so just pick ones that aren't going to be used as a star system in the game. There are literally thousands. You can just go and look them up online and keep scrolling till you find one you like. There's a bit of a bottleneck at the minute with the fact that only one ship of each class can bear a name. It has to be unique. Hopefully they'll change that in the future. I really don't think it's tenable, but this hopefully will have gone some way to giving you some inspiration. Remember that in just a moment I'm going to give examples for a whole bunch of different ships just to kind of get your creative juices flowing, or for you to nick the idea. That's entirely up to you. Just remember to press pause because they'll only be on screen for a couple of seconds. You've been watching Drinkers with Gaming Problems. Thank you very much for stopping by. I'll see you soon.